So this session will be focusing on getting insights from our panelists with regards to their experience managing highly complex or ambiguous situations in their organizational, professional, and personal lives. We hope to walk away from this session with better tools to employ for these situations. So joining us today, we have Patty Ziegler, who is the Chief Digital Officer at Scotts Miracle-Gro, Barbara Dondarski, the VP of Service Excellence at Johnson & Johnson, and Mike Vance, DMS Service Change Agent at Discover Financial. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. So to start, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and how you have encountered ambiguity in your role. Let's start with Barbara.
Thanks, Stacy. Very excited to be here. So I am Barbara Dondarski. I am the Vice President of Service Excellence at Johnson & Johnson. I'm part of the Global Services Organization. I've been with J&J for 4 years now. I manage a global team. We handle continuous improvement activities, reporting and analytics. I have a team that works on automation using desktop tools such as Alteryx. And we do some integrated service management across all of the functional areas that we support in HR, finance, and procurement. So as you can imagine, my role is complex, and we deal with ambiguity every day in the processes that we support. And as we try to improve those processes and make changes, we do face a lot of ambiguity. I think in the world today, with where we are, we also understand that change is constant. And we should all be pretty comfortable at this point with that pace of change. So I think we all know that we have to manage making decisions with about 80% of the information that we would really like to have, and then be able to be agile and move on. I don't think that's any different that you're going to hear from the other panelists. So Mike, let me turn it over to you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role.
Thanks, Barbara. So my name is Mike Vance. I'm a senior change agent at Discover Financial, which is something my mom has to tell people at dinner parties, which sounds like a fake title, but I work with teams to help them try to solve complex process challenges. And currently I'm supporting a team called AML, which stands for Anti-Money Laundering. Their challenge they're trying to figure out how to do is how are they going to handle increased investigations that they need to perform without being able to increase staff given the current economic climate. So they're trying to find ways of being faster at going through those investigations, or finding ways of being sharper as to which are the right investigations for them to be able to look at. And thinking about what ambiguity means in my role, I think it often fits into a couple different categories. One is about like how I provide value. There's a lot of different things I could do, but it's hard to figure out exactly how I'm going to provide value in any given situation. Is it training? Is it support? Is it just doing the process analysis for the teams? It can be unclear who decides what I do. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved, each with their own interests, and it can be difficult to parse out whose I should be heeding at any given time. So for me, I tend to pick a point of view as to who I'm really serving, build out a roadmap to make sure that we're all clear about what I'm planning on achieving, getting the leader buy-in into what the plan is for the attack, and then finally keep checking it. So every week I have a meeting with leadership to make sure that we're all aligned with the plan and that the plan hasn't changed given everything that's moving around us so quickly. So that's how I try to handle ambiguity in my role. But Patty, how do you see it in yours?
Why, thank you. My name is Patty Ziegler, and I am the Chief Digital Officer at Scotts Miracle-Gro. And for me, ambiguity starts with my title. My title changes a lot over the past couple of years. It's changed at least 3 or 4 times. And it also expands or contracts based on what the organization needs us to do. So today, being the Chief Digital Officer, direct-to-consumer business is the biggest piece of the puzzle that I take care of for the Scotts Miracle-Gro company. And I think the way that ambiguity about what my responsibilities are also an opportunity that you can take advantage of. So seizing the opportunity of what you can get done because you have a little bit of flexibility and how you can make that work for you is something I've really enjoyed and embraced over the years. We have had, there's lots of times in your career, as you will all learn, when you need to define what you're going to do as part of accepting the job. And so I think that is really not letting your title define you and being defined by the work you do and your place within the organization.
Stacey, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for your insights on that. I want to move on to our next question. Please feel free to again send questions to me in the chat if you have any. We'll be addressing those in the next section. So for the next question, how have you taken an unprecedented event like COVID to create a positive change in your role? Let's start with Patty.
Well, I sort of gave it away in the lead in there, so should have paid more attention to my notes. But the biggest thing at Scott's Miracle-Gro that has happened this season is COVID, and the opportunity that created for people to enter the category. So 21 million people, many of you in this audience, got interested in gardening. And so that was an opportunity for the role I was in to create a positive change for me and the organization. It's nice when that happens at the same time, to sort of engage new consumers, get them interested in gardening, not only through delivering products to their home, which was a big part of what we did, but also creating the content and interesting information that would keep them engaged, keep them motivated, and tell them how to do the things they needed to do that they were encountering for the first time in the garden. And the biggest thing that did for the role was this team, and we're a decent sized team, but we always are the skunk works group that's working on the next thing. It brought the group that was doing the next thing really into the spotlight. And that was a joy for everyone on the team to work hard, focus hard, and make the changes you needed to do to get the work done. And the advantage that created for our team and the sort of ambiguity and complexity was that the speed of decision making really increased. And that was a benefit that we've carried on through the early days of March and are still reaping the benefits of today. So that was really how COVID was positive for the company and positive for our team and positive for our whole team's sort of reputation, which is always kind of nice. So I'll guess, Barbara, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks, Patty. I'll take this a little bit of a different direction. So one of the hats that I wear at J&J is that I'm also the Tampa site lead. So as we headed into COVID and shut the site down in March, and we've not really been back into the site since March, we have a few critical processors that do have to go into the office. But we all had to move to our business continuity plans very quickly, and thank goodness we had them all in place. So we were able to start working remotely very seamlessly. And the organizations that we support, you can imagine, finance had to do closing of the books at the end of the quarter remotely. We had to do our HR processes remotely. So a lot of these things, just took on a lot of new complexity and meaning. So we had to find ways to also connect better. The technology changes have been great. We have Zoom, we have Microsoft Teams, we have Skype. We are able to get still face-to-face with people without actually having to be in the office. So I think that some of the technology changes have been very positive overall and have helped us to find new ways to do our roles and to still be very effective. Mike, what about you at Discover?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think both of your stories sort of encapsulate that there's an advantage that you can highlight even when there's these challenging circumstances. So we over in AML, we're a much smaller team than we otherwise would be in order to take on the challenge we're working on. So it's 2 folks against an organization of more than 250. So we knew we had to get creative about how we were going to tackle that challenge. And in reflecting, I actually think there's a couple of advantages that came about because we were such a small team. So first of all, because we were such a small team, it helped us really focus in on what was most important. And it helped us sort of focus that conversation with leadership about like, what is the key things that we need to focus on? Because we can't really take on anything beyond that because we're such a small group. So I find sometimes when I'm in larger teams, it's harder to say no. But with such a small group, we actually had that, we had to say no, and it kind of gave us the wherewithal to make sure we did that. Second of all, it made us be more creative in the way that we provided our support to the organization. Traditionally, we do a lot of the work for our teams, and that just wasn't going to be able to be so with such a small crew. So we ended up finding ways of we teach and they execute was the strategy we pursued, along with how do we scale our training. So we've been doing a lot of sort of like big Zoom lunch and learns for folks to be able to make sure that everybody can benefit. Whereas I would traditionally do that with smaller teams, sort of more, a scale of like 15 to 20 to 1. And finally, I think having a big challenge to be able to go after really helps motivate teams. So I work in the process improvement world, and sometimes that can feel like a nice to have. But given the challenge that they're looking at, they need to make changes, which makes it much easier to sort of get teams to grapple with the challenge they need to take on. So I think overall it has been generally beneficial for us to be able to try to pivot in these unprecedented times.
Thank you so much, you all, for that. I have a question. Let's see here. So, for instance, this one goes out to Patty. She had mentioned that there are issues with, for instance, there are issues essentially with the speed at which you have to move, right? So how has that affected, your personal life and different things? How are you managing that as a whole, and dealing with the pressure of having to additionally take on more responsibilities? Where are your limits there?
Sure. So a couple of things that we, like many, almost every other office, closed, but we were also deemed essential. So we had quite a bit of complications around who was going to work, people in the plants, people in our sales organization working in stores, as well as the people in HQ. And so we all were sent back to our homes and took advantage of some of the technology. But the positive change sort of for me personally and professionally were a little bit different, but both good because of the speed of decision making and with the efficiencies when things could take place. So that time I happened to have a long commute. So that time commuting was now time that I could focus on different things like getting more healthy, and also just like having the time space to think about getting things done. So as a person, no commute. My personal pledge to myself was half of that time was going to go towards taking care of me. And then the other half of the time went back to taking care of people on my team. So just a little more time. And then in the work organization, the way that COVID really was a professional benefit, what I spoke to earlier about being sort of a more important part of the organization, which was nice and awesome, because attention is always a good thing. Some of the tension wasn't always because of good things, but it is always a good thing to have. It also helped us reach out across the organization and build stronger connections to departments that wouldn't have normally been in our sort of realm, because all of a sudden everyone was caring about getting their product shipped, but also they were caring about quality assurance and QA and different kinds of things that never really thought about the direct-to-consumer team very often. And so that was another way that we embraced the change. And the flatness of the organization that was created because of having to focus on the problems you needed to solve day to day was another thing that helped us manage through complexity. We decided every morning, and we use it's like a sprint methodology. We have the stand up and everyone talks about what we're going to do. And it was really great to see everyone come there, be present, be ready. And then the decision making just really sped up, which also, again, has led to more good things to come.
Do you feel as if that added additional responsibilities for people who didn't have them before, gave them increased opportunity to advance and to step up? As from a leadership perspective, how did you see people either step up or not, and how did you sort of guide them along the way in terms of that?
In our case, bottom to top of our D2C team, people stepped up. And so a tangible example of that is, the guy that on our team who manages our warehouse operations, like he all of a sudden was going to meetings with the COO and talking about our performance. And so it really created opportunities for people to step up and make connections that they would have probably been able to make walking through halls, but there's no hallways anymore. In this case, it was even better because he got to make the impression in a situation where he was responding to pressure and doing his job well. And so it really did create opportunities for people to step up. And also I think it created more opportunities for people to step up because of the pressure of the times and what was happening, but also just the focus on the problem let everybody step up, I think, a little bit easier because you knew what you were trying to accomplish. And that, I think, gives people, and I know Mike will talk about it a little bit later, when you narrow in on what you're trying to do, your confidence seems to grow. And so that was another positive benefit for the younger people on the team that are sort of working up in their career, that was an advantage that came from a big complex situation, but getting D2C right was the focus, and we did that.
Yeah, if I could jump in here as well, just a couple more comments. You know, as we talk about people that have had to step up, even as we've looked at our reporting and analytics around COVID itself, how do we understand globally where every different site is in a different place in terms of COVID. Every country is in a different place. So as you start to look at this as a global complex problem, we had to figure out ways to simplify this and get it on one page and be able to do those executive updates on a regular basis across the company. So the team really, we had some people that were really creative in terms of how do they take the technology that we have and the way to simplify information and automate information and have it happen daily. You know, again, it gave them that opportunity to step into something that they were probably technically very good at, but now became very visible. So it did give, you know, just a very structured way for people to be able to rise in their career. So I think it's done a lot of good for us as well.
Thank you. Mike, did you have something you were gonna?
Sorry, the only thing I was hoping to think about when Patty was describing the advantage of not having that commute, and Patty, I want to kick this back to you because there was something you brought up during a rehearsal that I thought was such a great idea, was really finding ways to take advantage of the additional time. So I'm going to work full time, and then I also am a part-time student. So I've also really benefited from the lack of commute and being able to work remotely. But Patty, did you want to share about the taking one walking meeting every day? Because I think that is just the greatest idea.
Sure, it was really one thing I have tried to do every day to make my life a little more sane, and I'm sure many of you will feel the pressure of every 30 minutes your lives are blocked out, is I pick one meeting a day to be my walking meeting, and I try to just like, there's everyone's the demand to be on the screen, but there's usually one meeting you can figure out that you're just supposed to be listening to, and so I pick that meeting, and that's the meeting I take a walk around the neighborhood. And it's awesome when it's an hour meeting I get to pick, but usually it's 30 minutes. But it does really change my perspective and makes it easier to look at a screen and your face all day long, which that minute when you see your face big is always like, oh.
I am stealing that.
Get to see everybody all at once. Please do.
Oh, yes. Oh, the joys of Zoom. So I'm going to move on to the last section here. What day-to-day activities do you practice? This kind of segueing in a bit of what we said earlier, but you know, what day-to-day activities do you practice in your role to break through complexity and make difficult decisions? Let's start with Mike.
You bet. Can we knock to the next slide real quick?
Yep.
So some of the best advice I've gotten about complexity is really just to take a quick moment and think about, why is what I'm experiencing so complicated? And if you can sort of isolate what the real question you're grappling with is, it can help you figure out which of these tools might be most appropriate to help sort through it. So these are 4 challenges that I run into a lot. I'm sure there's a lot more, but I just wanted to run through how I try to address them. There are links attached to each of these, so I'm sure you could dig into these topics all for a long while. The first of which is I just have too many options in front of me. And I, like a lot of people, get like a lot of choice anxiety. I'm struck with having too many options in front of me. There's a whole jam study where if you put out too many types of jam, people just don't buy the jam because they're paralyzed with fear. And so if you find yourself in that situation, I find what is helpful is to pick certain criteria that you're going to use to make that decision. And to sort of stick with that framing. So I've been trying to buy a car recently. There were infinite choices for me to look at. I finally narrowed it to a discrete set, and then I built criteria by which I was going to help make that decision. And then the second part is to really leverage the test and learn cycle. So plan, do, check, act is a simple 4-part process where you figure out what you're going to go do, you do it, you determine whether or not it got you the results you were looking for, and if it didn't, you adjust. And remember that, you know, most decisions you can evolve from and grow into. The second one I run into a lot is not being able to focus on more than one thing at a time. I cannot multitask. It's not a bone I have in my body. And so something I use to be able to sort of sort through many requests all at once, or your inbox or whatever, is what I call the 4 Ds. So is it something I don't need to do and I could just delete this? Is it something I can delegate to someone who's a better fit for that job? is it something I need to defer some time to actually think about? And so you maybe block out some time on your calendar to actually spend some time thinking about it and answering it? Or is it something I just need to do right now? And if you can sort of rifle through all your stuff real quick through the 4Ds, it can help you really focus in on what's important. Third is I'm not really clear on the strategy or what my scope is. I described that a little bit in the beginning, where there's often a lot of stakeholders and it's not super clear what I need to do. One of those challenges is having a conversation, pretty direct one, with leadership. There's a great class called Crucial Conversations, which has all sorts of tips on how to have sort of uncomfortable conversations with folks. But to really work on getting that clarity from leadership. And the second is trying to sort of encourage people to focus in on a cogent and focused strategy, and sort of that concept of a good strategy is saying no to stuff. And so there's a great book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which helps sort of outline what that looks like. And the final one, and this is probably the one I suffer from the most, is that I've taken too much complexity on my own. I'm definitely the one on that group project who will just like take it and run away from the group and do it on my own, because working with people is hard. So often what I need to remind myself is we need to sit on the same side of the table with our stakeholders and work on the problem together. So there's a great book called Dare to Lead that really delves into this problem. But I think if you can remember that, there are many people in AML, for example, who all want to find ways of improving this process and all bring something unique to that table. If I can't figure it out alone, that shouldn't surprise anybody, and we should all work on trying to solve these complex challenges together. So that's my 4. Barbara, what do you do?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think about a lot when I think about complexity is, to be honest with you, just my calendar, right? I think I have one day next week where I am quadruple booked all day long. So, in order to manage some of that complexity, I really try to control my calendar. And I think that's one of the skills that everybody has to do. And that may change over your career. Where I am right now in terms of leadership, I try to portion out my calendar in a way that gives me the ability to spend hopefully like 30% of my time working with my team directly, my direct reports, coaching conversations, one-on-ones, understanding what's going on with their organizations. I spend about 30% of my time really delving into the projects, the key deliverables for the team, and exactly where we stand on those key deliverables. I spend 10 to 15% of my time really thinking strategically about the future. Where does the team need to go? What does the organization need to look like next year? It's October. I'm already writing 2021 goals and keying up key projects for next year. So that becomes really important. And then the rest of the time, we've talked about this during this conversation, and Patty has talked about this. I spend time on myself. And whether that's networking, whether that is a class, whether that is LinkedIn Learning, whether that is networking with different people across the industry or across my organization, I spend time on what I need to do for the future. I'm not going to be in this role. This is my second role at J&J already in the 4 years that I've been there. As Patty says, our job descriptions are always changing and complex. I expect for that to continue to change as well. So I do a lot to try and understand where I want to be and how I need to get there. Patty, how about you?
Well, I'll start by saying that for all of you listening, and I saw somebody shout it out in the chat, they have both given you very practical and very awesome advice. So I've already started looking at my calendar on a week-by-week basis since meeting Barbara to be sure I'm proportioning my workout. And so I'm going to take our panel discussion in a little bit of a different direction when I think about complexity and bring it a little bit closer to home when challenging a big problem or task. And so one of the things I try to do, and Mike gave us all those tips about how you need to define the problem, and sometimes you just have too many options. I always try to think about what I'm trying to get done, not the meeting I have this week, but the meeting I have a week from now. So if I have a meeting on Tuesday that I'm planning for, I really think about the meeting the Tuesday after that and what needs to be accomplished by that second meeting. And if you do that, and you're sort of always one meeting ahead, is what I tell my direct reports and people on my team, you find that you can speed up the process so much by just spending time by yourself, gathering your thoughts to the point about we have to pay attention to what we're trying to accomplish. And then it also makes the task seem so much smaller and easier for everyone to understand. So if you plan sort of one meeting out, it's easy to take a complex task and make it seem bite-sized and seem like you can actually make decisions faster and make progress faster. And so when I'm faced with something complex and ambiguous as, okay, fixed e-commerce, you really have to start like, one meeting at a time to get there. And something else I brought up in the course of our meeting each other and getting to know each other is sometimes you're going to have that spot in your life where the assignment you are given is fix e-commerce. Like it is not very clear, and you have a boss and they're not necessarily going to tell you how to make that clear. You're at whatever level of the organization you're in, they expect you can handle that. And so that is always the interesting thing to think about, that sometimes your job is to define the outcome or define the task because someone has given you an outcome. So your boss says, what am I going to get for it? Or this is what I want done, fixing something. And then it is your job to sort of build the roadmap and build the plan. And that's where I always find that planning 2 meetings out is usually the easiest way to define the task, not only for yourself, but to the group you're leading to accomplish something awesome. So I'll throw it back to you, Stacy.
Yep. Or I think Mike wanted to say something.
Yeah, just in reflecting on what Barbara and Patty are talking about, something I really love about both of those strategies is it's focused on being purposeful with your time and with your intentions. I think often that is the key challenge to unpick when you're struck with complexities, that I don't know what to focus on, and by being intentional about what you're going to do, I think it can really help solve those issues. I think both your strategies, I think, really are clever ways of being really focused and intentional in a way that I really like.
Thank you all for that. We have a question from the audience. One question we have is, how can MBA students take this time of complexity and leverage it to get ahead in the job search, and when real connections are harder to come by?
Barbara, you had the best answer. You should start with that one.
I have the best answer. Oh gosh, now you put me on the spot. What did I say?
You talked about networking virtually and how awesome it is.
Oh yeah, the networking piece. Yeah, so, and I think that one other thing I will say there, besides just networking, one of the things that I've realized in my career is that rarely does anybody say no to you. So if you ask for a meeting, rarely does anybody say no. So I can't tell you how many people have come to me and say, hey, can I just have a career conversation? Can I understand, how you got to where you are? And, maybe gives me some ideas of who else I should speak to continue to expand my network. And by the way, every time you have a conversation with somebody, you should ask them for 2 other names of other people that you should speak to that may help you in your journey. So that's one way to just constantly increase your network. But don't be afraid to ask, because again, I have yet to find somebody that I have asked for a meeting that has said no to me and will not find 30 minutes or 45 minutes on their calendar. From a, again, just connection perspective, you can't go have coffee at this point, but you certainly can get on a Zoom and have a conversation. So completely, it's so easy to do. Just ask.
I feel like a lot of people, it's also a welcome too, because I feel like a lot of, being in quarantine is also a bit isolating. So they welcome that conversation, that 30 minutes. It's nice to just get exposure to new people and meet new people in your inner circle, So I think that that's great. And the worst that they can do is say no, and you've lost nothing. So I really appreciate that advice. Mike was going to add on.
Just to share, actually, from a panel I attended earlier this morning about job searching during a bear market. One of the things they brought up that I thought was interesting is that while many industries are struggling, some industries are actually thriving through the COVID crisis. So, for example, folks who sell PPE, healthcare. I know friends over at ConAgro are doing really great because they sell frozen foods, of which many people are buying a lot of those right now. And so if you're able to understand the complexity of the moment you're in, you may be able to leverage that in your job search to be able to highlight, well, where are opportunities likely to be?
Yeah, they're gardening, aren't they, Patty?
They are gardening, for sure. So Scott's Miracle-Gro is a good place to take a look as well. But I would just add on to Barbara's comments about, like, don't be afraid to reach out, because really don't be. Everyone you reach out to, it's a compliment. You are complimenting them by your request. And so maybe they won't have time. You worry you're being a nuisance. You're really complimenting them. I want to hear from you. And then I just go into that conversation just saying, knowing one thing you want to get out of it. And people really like to talk about their own journey, as you hear from the three of us in this panel discussion. So just, go for it.
Yeah, just one other thing that's been very interesting is I've been sitting on this panel. My notifications keep popping on my phone and people are pinging my LinkedIn, and I bet it's some of you, which is the right thing to do, right? So it's a great place to connect.
Absolutely. And you all mentioned that you were open to connecting and continuing conversations if you have any. So that's, feel free to utilize our wonderful panelists as a resource in the future. If you have a question, they're happy to help. So we have another question out here. So essentially, let's see, this is the question. Some companies are trying to simplify and streamline their business to increase profitability. Others are embracing complexity. How do you balance embracing complexity and simplification in a business? And also, could you give an example of maybe, when an organization went too far either way and, how they course corrected?
Yeah, I can jump in and start. I think that one of the things that you have to be is really, really focused on what your business goals are. So one of the things that we've done across our global services organization, and the GS organization at J&J is about, I don't know, it's over 4,000 people strong. One of the things that we really did at the start of COVID, as people were starting to work remotely and we were looking at our goals for the year, we really went after simplifying and going toward big rocks. So we called them, the big rocks. What are the things that we really need to concentrate on for the rest of this year, given that we are now a remote workforce? People are at home, they're dealing with childcare, they're dealing with elder care. You have families at home with you, your home environment can be very complex. So we certainly try to simplify. In the past, though, I can give you an example of sometimes when we've gone too far. There has been like technology implementations where we didn't do a good job of change management. We weren't as purposeful as we needed to be or as detailed as we needed to be in terms of how this implementation was going to fundamentally change the way that people worked with technology. And we've had to put things off. We have a new technology going in this fall right now that's a year late. Because it was too complex, the change management wasn't there, the technology didn't do all the things we needed it to do, so there were some enhancements that needed to happen ahead of time. So I think every company has to realize and respect that if they see this going poorly, that it's not the end of the world to postpone. It's almost worse to put something in that's too complex than it is to postpone it and simplify before you get it in.
Very helpful.
I think that's great. I've been thinking about where we see that within the DMS verse. An internal tug of war we run into a lot is about how we can benefit from standardization. I know everybody doing it one way, where we can build a lot more collateral. We can sort of make sure that there's a lot more uniformity in our approach, while making sure that we are tailoring our approach directly to the business and what they need. So I think one example that comes to mind is there was a visual management approach we were trying called Kanban, which is very focused on like individual definable widgets, which makes it very easy from a measurement perspective. And this approach just did not work very well for our folks in the corporate office who predominantly work on projects which are messy and they're not very comparable from one to another. And so the skills that were really helpful to helping teams where their work was much more repeatable didn't find as much value in this other place. And so we found we're in that tension of which one do we focus more on, is bringing us together or individual tailoring. And I find if you can focus on the mission and provide clarity about like, how do I know when I'm providing value, then those tailoring versus simplification decisions became easier because you knew when it was providing value and when it wasn't.
Great. We have another question. So Mike, you mentioned uncomfortable conversations. What strategies can we use to have hard conversations? Especially over Zoom, for instance, it's a little different, and even as queer people in this complex time.
Yeah, so I'll definitely take the class because it's way better than whatever I'm going to say. The highlights for me from the class was to break it into sort of 3 steps, as you'll see I tend to do for most stuff. First, just say what's happening without what you're inferring. So, here are the facts of the case of what I'm understanding. Tell them, like, the story I'm telling myself about what I'm understanding is this, and then ask the other person for what they see. So, for example, I might talk to a leader and say, currently, um, you know, teams have told me that they don't know what our priorities are. We spend a bunch of time in these meetings and we have not accomplished our to-do lists by the deadlines that we said. The story I'm telling myself about that is that we don't have a clear strategy or that our teams don't understand what it is. What do you see? And then that invites a conversation for us to discuss. Maybe I didn't understand the variables the same way that they did, or it invites us to work on the problem together. But it can be a real diffusing way of having that conversation.
Yeah, for me, the only other thing that I'll add is one of the things that I spend quite a bit of time doing is having constant conversations, right? I know that they're tough conversations, but if you have career or performance conversations constantly, you're handling issues before they become big. So with a lot of my team, I spend a lot of time talking about exactly how they're performing, where they are against their goals, how things look for the rest of the year, if things aren't getting done, what's not getting done and why. And it allows people the time to pivot, right? So as you give that feedback, I had somebody on my team recently, completely do a 180 and really start to perform really well after giving some very direct feedback. So I think that you can't be afraid of those conversations, but the more you have them and the sooner you have them, the easier they are.
Just to pile on there, Barbara, something that came up during our rehearsals for this panel was the added need for ceremonies, especially now that everybody's remote, because a lot of those things happen sort of informally when we were in the office. But having regular stand-ups with your team, regular retros with your team, and finding ways of connecting and being purposeful, like every week we're going to come together and we're going to talk about it, can be a way of sort of breaking through that, particularly since we're all at home and wouldn't otherwise just informally have those conversations.
One of the things I'd just add to the the discussion today is that I think starting with the facts always is a good one. And I think always being there and offering the encouragement. And I always try to end these sessions, especially where the middle of the conversation is a little bit about how things can go better and how the performance can be better, is how can I help you? If you end every meeting with that sentence, the person who is, maybe struggling or maybe just knocking it out of the park just really feels like you were there to help them fine tune their performance and even make it better. And so I always find that switching it to a little bit at the back end of the conversation about how you can support them always makes them go a little easier.
I love that. That is a very great way of sort of making sure that we're all working on the same problem together. That's awesome.
Barbara and Patty and Mike, this is Will, and I'm the assistant session director, everyone. But it's been great to get to know the three of you and rehearse with the three of you. And what comes to mind as someone who's a first-year MBA student, worrying not so much maybe about the networking and being able to see that we'll be able to network easier in this more complex sort of Zoom world, but how do we find mentorship? How do we go from being just networked to finding mentorship when it seems like it's harder to make deep connections in a 15-minute Zoom coffee chat? So that's something that stresses me out a little bit, and I would ask for your advice on how we find mentorship, not just a network.
The best mentor-mentee relationships I've had have actually been when somebody just sort of asks. So, but coming with a framework, not asking, will you be my mentor? Because those always sort of fall apart. But I'd like you to be my mentor because A, B, C, and D, and I'm working on X, Y, Z. Then it actually makes it easier for me to say yes or no based on where I feel like time commitment or the capabilities that I have even to share. And that has always worked best. I think to Barbara's point earlier, like, don't be afraid to ask. Typically, if someone says no to being your mentor, they don't have time. It's not that they don't think you're awesome. So that's sort of that's just the most effective ones have come to me that way, with a more discrete list of what they're trying to accomplish. And then also sort of time bound, like I want to be a director and I'm struggling here as a manager. How can you help me get there? These are the 3 things I think I need to work on. And, you know, that's sort of a easier mentor-mentee relationship to enter, and always also very fulfilling.
Yeah, I completely agree with Patty. Most of the mentoring relationships that have been really successful with me as well have been with people that have come to me, people that I have gone to, you know, that grow kind of naturally. And again, I agree, they run a course, right? They're not forever. They're for 6 months to get you through something. They're for 3 months to get you through something. And then be very purposeful about the difference between coach, mentor, sponsor, right? Those are all different types of roles. So you have to be very purposeful, as if it's mentoring, as Patty said, you're getting through an issue. If it's sponsorship, which we all need, you need somebody that is saying your name when roles come up, that is advocating for you for the next project, right? So separate those types of things. Sponsors, usually you can go through your leader to help you find those people across the organization that can help you. But mentors, again, I'm with Patty. You go and you ask somebody who you've admired because you've seen them be a really great public speaker and you want to develop that skill more, and you're not comfortable, or you're having a really hard time getting to a level, or you're having a really hard time with a particular project, and you know that that person has led large projects. I mean, whatever those problem statements are for you, find a mentor that can help you through that.
So that is all wonderful. But the only thing I would tag in is just on a technical note. I found this to be really useful. I stole this from the Muse. But if you're looking to be introduced, there's a format that I am obsessed with. So it's find the middle person between the 2 of you, and then they can use the following. It's like, Patty, meet Barbara. Barbara, meet Patty. Patty, this is who Barbara is. Barbara, this is who Patty is. This is why you're meeting. Go to it, right? And if you can set it up, so all the information you need for that meeting is in that email. And then you, the intermediate person, can get out. And so I connect people all the time through that structure, and highly recommend it. I'm sure if you Google, like, I don't know, introduction, the Muse, it'll come right up.
You know, that happened to me last week, Mike. Somebody contacted me that I know and said, hey, can you talk to this other person? She's interested in global services. She'd like to get to know more about the organization. If not you, who could she speak to? I mean, it was perfectly written, right? It's exactly what you need to do.
Always check with the person that you're connecting them to before you send that email that it's okay to send that email. Sorry, I missed a step, but yes,
Yep.
it's a...
Great, thank you. I don't see any additional questions just yet. Audience, you're pretty quiet. Just feel free to send them to me if you have any. Okay, we actually just got one more. Okay, so when I have an idea for a new project or product arises, or some sort of product arises, let's see, let's read this. How do you decide whether to proceed with the project or not? That will require, yes, let me read that again. So when you have an idea for a new project that will require significant time and resources, how do you decide whether to do the project or not? What is your methodology?
For me, I mean, maybe this is too simplistic an approach, and I'm curious what Patty and Barbara have to say. But I think that the traditional business school answer to this is that if you have a good strategy, it should be easy to know if your project or product is on strategy or off strategy, right? And if we can be empirical in the way that we're trying to be making these decisions. So for example, if we're trying to grow our, potting mix soil business, and these are our goals, then it should be clear which projects and products should be in direction with that versus, we also think that we can get in the yogurt business. Maybe that's off message. So I think if you can be purposeful in articulating your strategy, it should make later decisions down the line a little bit more clear. But Patty, Barbara, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of complexity to that. So we went through a situation this year where we're deciding whether or not to buy a new technology. To me, it was a no-brainer. I sat there saying that this is going to create all kinds of value, be able to show us process problems easily, be able to funnel for continuous improvement across the organization. And it wasn't a ton of money, but we had quite a few leaders that sat back and said, we can figure this out ourselves without the technology. And I'm not sure that I want to spend money on that this year. After going around in circles for about 6 months, we finally got it approved, and we're now heading into, we just purchased and we're just heading into implementation. But, you know, to Mike's point, it's on strategy to an extent, right? It's technology that's really going to help us overall identify process issues and be able to funnel continuous improvement and other activities and create efficiency and excellence across the organization. But can we do without it is always the other question. And it took some convincing and a really good ROI analysis that was done by somebody on my team to show why and how quickly this was going to show results. Now we just have to go prove it. So we're on to, you know, figuring that part out. And I have about 1 quarter in order to do that. But, you know, I do think that things do get pretty complex at times, but, you know, you do really have to understand what the benefit is, how you're going to drive efficiency, how it's going to pay for itself. And as Mike says, be on strategy.
The only thing I would add to that is sometimes the easiest question or the question you're going to get from management as to whether you should do something or not, it comes down to what am I going to get for it? And so in Barbara's case, that came, the ROI analysis proved to them they were going to get something for it. And so that is always what you need to do. And if what am I going to get for it is answered, and you can connect it strategically to a big rock or a big project you're also trying to accomplish, those usually are 2 things that get you to the green light. But the journey that Barbara described is one I've been on many, many times myself, and strategically aligned to the idea, even though I have a great passion for that project. Like sometimes project dies even when you love them and you're the boss. So you really have to tie it into the strategy and know what am I going to get for it to sell something all the way through to senior management.
And that just made me think about one of the other challenges that I often struggle with is I think about the problem inside of the box that it was given to me in. But often when you're able to say, like, this is what you'll get for it, suddenly resources materialize that were not on the table beforehand. And so if you can focus in on, like, what is the value we're trying to drive? And here's what I can do with my current tools. And here's what I could do if I bought new technology or got new resources or whatever. Sometimes the circumstances change in front of your eyes, which can be really helpful. So another plug for what do I get out of it? Clarity from Patty.
We have another question. So essentially, what can you do when you have insufficient data or not complete data, right? Like say you have 80% of the data and that 20% that you don't have turns out to be like this complete behemoth, right? Something that makes it way more complex. How do you do damage control to manage through it? How important is communication in a situation like this?
Communication is key, right? And understanding where you are. And, you know, we do this all the time. I think Patty at the beginning was talking about sprints and this agile methodology that we're in today. You know, every time we're going through sprints, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, whatever those sprints are, we're identifying problems quickly. We're communicating them up through the chain. So as more data becomes available, we're pivoting. And I think every company is going through that right now as you're continuing to look at, you know, we have a squad model in place with our IT partners. So people are very focused on the deliverables. And as we have the daily stand-ups, the weekly team meetings, the monthly sponsor meetings, we are running all of these projects through that type of methodology to ensure that we are identifying problems quickly. So far, the projects that we've been working on this year haven't been any huge showstoppers to stop us from moving forward, but we have had to pivot and course correct and even put things off for a week or two and releases off for a week or two if that was appropriate. Once we found that we didn't have the data we needed or we didn't have the funding that we needed, there are usually roadblocks. But again, the sooner we communicate those up, as Mike said, the sooner that they get solved.
Thank you.
I also think, remember, the further you go up in an organization, it's like having 80% of the information sometimes is a lot. Like, so maybe when you're lower level and as your career progresses, you feel like you always, and this is what I always say, like, success in business is no longer getting an A. Success in MBA school you all want A's, you're going to win this championship or that or the other thing. But as you move up into an organization, it's getting the outcome. And so 80% of the information, if your gut tells you and all that information points to, it's going to get that outcome. Oftentimes 80% is enough to go for it, because as Barbara just so eloquently described, things change, relationships change, technology changes, something happens to disrupt everything, and it will. Mike talked about how they had to just cancel that project and did it a year late, or I think that maybe that was Barbara, that was you. Sometimes it's that, I guess not all the time, that's okay. Things change in motion, and you're not trying to get an A anymore, you're trying to get an outcome, and it's the journey is a big important part of transitioning into a successful career.
Love that. The only thing I would tag in is if it's a big risky thing that you're thinking about, just another shout out for a tool that I'm a big fan of. I think that seems to be my MO today. It's an Fmea, stands for Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. Basically, just think about any and all things that could go wrong and evaluate them on the following criteria: severity, how bad would that actually be? Frequency, what is the likelihood that it's going to actually happen? And then detectability, which is a strange one, but it's what would my ability to intercede be? Like, could I see a bad outcome coming and maybe get in the way? So if you're concerned about what that mysterious 20% could do, how it might actually change your decision, maybe that might be a useful tool to sort of think through the actual challenges, and you may be surprised that maybe it's less risky than you thought.
I feel like you could develop some sort of followership, Mike, with like your methodology, like the rule of three with Mike. You know, some sort of
I could write a book.
something. Yeah, exactly. You got a method, it's working. I think this might be our last question. So following up the mentorship conversation, they wanted to know, you know, what are the thoughts on seeking mentors inside and outside of the LGBTQ community? Let's go to Barbara.
Yeah, I don't really think about necessarily the LGBTQ community necessarily when I'm looking at mentorship. I'm honestly concentrating a lot on who the person is and what the problem is that I'm trying to solve. That having been said, it depends on where you are in the world as well. So I lived and worked in Budapest, Hungary for a couple of years, and the situation there for the LGBTQ community is very different than other parts of the world. So I did have a lot of people coming to me there talking about how to be successful in a career when you are part of our community, and how to manage to one life at work and one life at home, because their worlds were very different. So, you know, I think it's something that you should actively look at times, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm looking at the question in the chat, it's also talking about men versus women, and men being in positions of power more often than women. I have had mentors in my career that were men. I've also had women. So I, again, am looking more at the problem than I am at the gender. But, you know, I do think that those things are changing in companies as well. And I think that companies are being much more sensitive and are concentrating on ensuring diversity in gender, diversity in race, and are being very cognizant of that, both on their panels for interviews as well as their interview slates. So I think we are coming quite a long way, not that there's not a lot of work to be done.
Have there been any like red flags, I guess, going into different companies that you've noticed, just personally, you know, to indicate that it isn't as an inclusive environment, for instance? One thing I will do is I'll, you know, look and see, you know, how diverse is their board, you know, how, you know, what kind of organizations is it, are there, who are the leaders is usually a good indication for me, how comfortable it will be for myself and what my potential is to, you know, accelerate more easily in the company, you know, as a queer woman. But you know, what have been your indications that it's been a comfortable environment, you know, to the panel in general, as, you know, a woman or queer person, that it's an inclusive environment, and what has an indication that it isn't?
It's a good question. I mean, for me, I always look for the HRC index. I think that's very helpful to get a sense of, do they care enough about queer rights that they're going to actually, take the time to make sure that they score well. I would reckon that any company that would bring folks to Ramba is probably going to be reasonably good about being an LGBT person at that company. I think to the question about networking, you can get a good sense for what that is like to work at a company by talking to the folks who actually work there. And so if you can meet people who are queer who work at that company, you can get a sense of, are you the only one? Or, is there a good community there? I think having an ERG is a good sign, but I don't think that it necessarily reflects all of the culture. The first internship I ever had was at a power company, and every time I was in a truck with somebody, they were listening to Rush Limbaugh. So it was not a good culture fit for me. And I don't think I could have gotten that from like their website.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different lists out there. You can look at Working Mothers magazine to see how well they, what their policies around family leave are and those types of things. So there's a whole bunch of different areas you can look at to see how diverse and inclusive a company is. I completely agree with you, Mike, on the HRC index as well. So the ERGs, I think, are very important, and how active those ERGs are.
Well, I believe that's our last question. Thank you so much to the panel for all your guidance and insights, very helpful. And if you, again, have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to them on Pathable or LinkedIn, and they're happy to help, myself included, if I can help in any way as well. So thank you all for the session, and have a good Ramba, and hope to see you all next year. Bye.